Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the Elevate Your Running podcast. This week is all about peak week essentials. And you might be asking yourself, does this seem early? Is this early? Well, if you're running a September race, a September marathon, half marathon, you most likely will be in peak week in early September, early to mid September. So know this episode isn't too early, and it's going to be a great episode to reference when you are approaching peak week for your next A goal race. I'm really excited about this episode. I guess I'm excited every week because it feels like such a great way to get information out to the running community and helping, whether it's one person or dozens of runners, show up just a little bit differently and seeing what comes from that. Before we get started, I wanted to share an elevated moment from an Elevate athlete who is able to run with joy and gratitude on this day. And we had a coaching call earlier in the week, and he texted today saying he just felt so grateful, so joyful. He felt so good on his run. He's coming off of racing a half marathon last month, and that he's just really excited to spread that joy and that gratitude to anyone that he interacts with for the day. So he wanted to send a text sharing that joy, and also how great our partnership has been over the last year. So I love that elevated moment. Like, let's go out and have runs that feel good, that are joyful. You really take in the beauty of the outside. Maybe you're inside running on a treadmill, but I think oftentimes with running and training, we get into the monotony of it. And it can be really easy to get down on ourselves, be hard on ourselves, not really understand how cool it is to be able to move our body, which was also something that this athlete had said. Move our body, be able to do what we do, have movement, have joy. And maybe for the next outside run that you do, you could probably apply this for inside too. Take notice at what's around you and really celebrate that. There has to be something good around you. A lot of times when I go out for runs, especially in the summer, I just take a few minutes when I leave my wherever I'm running from to soak in the beauty of the run day. It could be looking at the flat irons. It could be running on really great soft surface trails. It could be the experience of seeing friends and teammates out on a run and just really soaking that in, and how grateful it is to be able to do this, how grateful I am to be able to do this, but also knowing that later in life, when all of this, whatever this is over, that these are the times, these are the days, these are going to be like the moments that we look back on and think, that was really cool. I got to do this thing that I really loved. I was really grateful for it. There were some days that felt good, some days that certainly didn't. And it was just a really cool time in my life. So I hope that that's something that you can shift into over the next week or so. I had a really great workout just a few days ago, and it was really nice to be able to see volume and speed on the track, and something that I've never done before, something that I certainly couldn't have done in the spring. So it's really nice to see progress, and I think all of us can attest to that. Anytime we feel progress, whether that's speed on a track, tempoing, maybe running our longest long run, or just feeling good. And I say just because I think a lot of times we don't necessarily think of that as such a big win, yet it is. And it's something really, really cool. So, really excited about that. I think maybe the best part about not just executing a great workout, the 400 splits were like right on, which was really exciting. It was a metronome style morning. I think what was really cool is I could really feel all the hard work I put in. I wasn't totally gassed at the end of the workout. I certainly could have ran another rep if I needed to. It was a cut down tempo starting at threshold, moving all the way down to what would be like 3K pace, right over mile pace. And I could still do something at the end of that run. Yet, Wednesday night, Thursday morning, my legs were so tired. They were so fatigued. I ran very, very, very slow. I had a double on Wednesday. The following morning, I ran very, very slow for the 75 minutes I was out there. And the next day, my legs felt a lot better. So I think that's also a win of honoring your body, honoring yourself, knowing when, on workout days, it's time to really push it to a certain point, and then recovering, running as slow as you can, really recovering through that run. Neither one of my recovery runs felt like I was recovering through it, but I know I was. And on Friday's run, that was a great indication that I did do what I needed to do to get back to feeling better, because there's always another workout coming up around the corner, or another long run, or in my case, both. So that's a really big win of the week. So let's get into this week's episode. I love this conversation about peak week because my coaching style is a little bit different with some athletes that I coach than what's like the mainstream type of peak week coaching. And I'll often hear from athletes that they talk about peak week and they get so excited. And I'm like, oh, your peak week is actually on a different week, but we'll get into that. So peak week can be slightly different for everyone. And I think this is where the value of having a coach comes in, because everyone shows up differently to a training cycle, right? And I think everyone shows up differently throughout the training cycle. So I'll have athletes ask me all the time, like, where do you think we're going with mileage? Where do you think my longest long run is going to be? Can I run 6 days a week? Like all these questions. And I always answer with, it depends. Like we can talk about it, but at the same time, it might not happen, because it really is based on how you're recovering, how you're showing up, how's your mindset, how's your health. If you're getting sick and needing time off, if your mindset isn't thriving through training, there's always going to be those days that don't feel great. But if there's a consistent, sort of burnout, red flag flagging in front of my face, training gets to look a lot different. If paces are being hit or not being met, there's so many different factors that go into it. There might be a lot of stress outside of training. So it always depends. And peak week falls into that it depends category. Most athletes are going to run their longest long run, their biggest workouts, and their highest weekly mileage for marathon training, half marathon training during peak week. Now, peak week is generally 2 or 3 weeks before the race. So it's right before you start taper. There is a caveat to this. And this is where if I'm coaching you, you might be thinking, that's not when my peak week is. If I have athletes who run high mileage, if I have athletes who have been in a training cycle for maybe a little bit longer, a typical training cycle could be anywhere from 12 to 20 weeks. The peak week can kind of float around a little bit, just slightly. So some athletes might have that long run 4 weeks out, where it's their highest volume week, their workout for that week. Let's say it's a 15K marathon tempo. They're running a 22-mile long run, and we have 3 more weeks to go before race day. And I'm going to start pulling them back so they can recover. There was a lot of intensity. There was a lot of volume. We mixed up the intensity and what the body was doing, which is exactly what you need for every single cycle. And so we're going to start peak week a little bit early, and then we're going to start to taper. The best part about the taper is that your training is absorbed into your body, and you rest, recover, rebuild, the 3 R's, and you head into race week feeling ready to go. Now, that ready to go feeling might happen early on during the taper, and it might happen the first day. You might feel it might actually be on race day. hopefully you're in the spectrum of those two time frames and you're able to feel good on race day. No taper is the same though. So that's just something to remind yourself with every race. So, peak week is definitely a fine balance between adding just a touch more stress, maybe turning that dial on the mileage up 1 or 2 miles, but not causing too much fatigue, because we want to make sure that the body can recover enough before going into race day. When I was in cherry blossom training for the spring, I was under a lot of fatigue. And there was a point about 4 weeks out from my 10-mile race where the fatigue was way too high. I pushed too hard on a run. I had too much quality in 4 days, and I had a lot of stress outside of running, and it was all too much, and I went way over. Maybe not way over, but I went over the cliff. And it was way too much fatigue, and I was sitting at the bottom of the hill. So you could think of peak week as you're causing that fatigue, you're adding just a little bit of stress. You're not sitting at the bottom of the hill, but you're maybe sitting at 3/4 from the bottom of the hill. And what you want to do during taper is get to the top of the hill. Peak week is definitely a mentally and physically demanding part of your training. There's a significant chunk of time and energy that goes into your training that week. So it's going to just be a little bit more, and just a little bit more could feel like a lot. You're generally going to feel more fatigued, and but you also don't want to run yourself into the ground. So it is a very fine balance. And this is where, if you're self coached, you have a really good idea of who you are, what you need, what is going to move that needle without overdoing it. And if you have a coach, they're paying attention to all those cues to kind of give you exactly what you need to feel a touch more stress and then head into taper, which is always, I don't know, a good feeling. Whether you like taper or not, it's like, whew, the hard work is done for a few weeks, anyways. And it's time to pull back, and it's really time to feel better. You really want to recover well so that your body does absorb the training and you're not overcooked before your race, which can happen if you go a little too hard during peak week, or in my case for cherry blossom, 4 weeks out, way too hard. And then I couldn't dig myself out of that hole before the race. So here are 5 key essentials for your peak week. The first thing that you want to focus in on during peak week is your sleep. This, hands down, is going to help you get through the week. We know that sleep is the number one recovery tool. We know that it's one of the best ways to feel better, and it's also free. I think the part that's a little annoying with sleep is, as I get older, as I have more stress, I run a business. I am invested in dozens and dozens of humans and their experience with running. It can be stressful at times, and my sleep will definitely suffer if that's the case. And you might be a parent, you might be very stressed at work too, or stressed at work, and sleep can sometimes be the first thing to go when that happens. But doing what you can do to get the most sleep that you can, and if you're saying, Coach Sarah, there's no way I can get more sleep, finding 15 minutes, which I think is something that we can all do, probably by turning off our phone, something we can all do. And also, the quality of sleep is huge. So something I've been doing in my training over the last month, something I'm definitely continuing going into fall marathon season and really running all the miles, is taking tart cherry juice once a day. So I take a serving once a day. It helps not only reduce inflammation, but it does help speed up the recovery process. And I feel like that has made a difference in my training. I'm running extremely well. I'm recovering well. And that has been there's been two things that have happened, but that's like one of them that I'm contributing to why I'm running the way that I am right now. And I'm sleeping better. So there is a really great tart cherry juice company called Cherry Bundy, and they have like a sleep product that has 3 grams of melatonin in it. So it does help you sleep and get quality sleep. And I notice my sleep score is better. I feel better when I wake up in the morning. I'm sleeping through the night, which is usually the problem. I'm up at 1 a.m. through 3 a.m. kind of person, or 4 a.m., depending on the day. So that will help you stay asleep, and sleep is going to help rebuild all the little muscles, tendons that we have broken down in training, and not only help your body feel better, but it's going to help your mind. And what we know to be true about peak week is that it's not just a physically demanding week, it is also a mentally demanding week. So, key point number 2 is to stay in the mile that you're in. And that means for peak week, you're staying in the mile or the day that you're in. So, this can look like a few different things. I'll hear from athletes sometimes, like they get their schedule for peak week, whether it's 3 or 4 weeks out before the taper starts, and they get all in their head about the week and the workout and the long run. And maybe they have like a little bit longer on one easy day and they just have no idea how they're going to do it. And they're already tired. Well, first things first, like getting anxious about something like that, it's very hard to not be anxious if you have those anxious tendencies. But getting anxious isn't going to help anything. But really trying to stay focused on the intention of breaking it down, the intention of each day, and maybe not even looking at the rest of the week. There are some times where I wish I could just program training runs to email or text like the night before and say like, this is your run for the day, this is your workout for the day. But I know because humans are so busy, and I coach a lot of parents, and I know I probably wouldn't want this either, like just for planning purposes, like we need to have a schedule, we need to know what's going on. So if you have your schedule full like 7, 10 days in advance, stay focused on the intentionality of that day. And don't even think about what's coming up next, because you have to get through today to be able to do tomorrow. And if you can stay hyper focused in on Monday's a recovery day, Tuesday is an easy day with maybe a few strides. Okay, now we get to Wednesday and it's a long marathon tempo. Staying true to the mile or to the rep that you're in, and take it chunk by chunk or piece by piece. I will often do this when I have big workouts, not even in peak week. My workout last week was a great example of that. It was 5 miles of work. It was a tempo cut down starting at 2 miles, 1.5, 1 mile, half mile. I've done that workout before. It's been more marathon paced. So, like, that's easy or easier, right? Because marathon paces should come a little natural, should be easy to some extent, should feel smooth. But this particular workout started at threshold, so 10K pace, and I cut down to like 3K ish pace. That's hard. And I told myself, like, I was excited for the workout. I was like, you just have to stay in the rep that you're doing. Don't even think about what's next. Stay in the rep, stay on pace, don't overrun, and take it one lap at a time. And that focus was there. And if you can do that in your workout on Wednesday, hooray, you're halfway through peak week. And you might have Thursday as a rest day, Friday is an easier recovery run. And now we're there at that Saturday long run. Oh my gosh, that Saturday long run. And again, taking it mile by mile, taking it chunk by chunk, enroll your people, enroll your squad, run your favorite run route or the route that maybe your coach needs you to run, depending on the technicality of the course. And and just be present with it. And if you can do that, and Sunday's either, an easy jog day and getting through some miles, time on feet on very tired, heavy legs, using that run as more of like, I like to use that as a visualization run of running the marathon on heavy, tired legs. Congratulations, you've made it to peak week. You've made it through peak week. And if you can take it one day at a time, 1 mile at a time, one rep at a time, it feels a lot easier to get through than looking at the week as a whole. And you might be running 1, 2, 3 miles of additional mileage from the week before. You could be running the most miles ever in your life in 1 week, which is so cool. And that's something that gets to be celebrated. And also the intentionality of each day and knowing that each step that you're taking, you are one step closer to getting through peak week and heading into Taper Town, which can be a fun place to be. So, the third key essential that you need for your peak week is carbs. Carbs, carbs, carbs. But specifically, I think if you can simulate your carbohydrate load before your long run that you want to implement for your race, that is ultimately going to help you for race day. And peak week. I've talked about this. Austin has done this. If you are an OG listener, he talked about doing this for some of his marathons, like taking your carbo load, and maybe it's not necessarily doing a 3-day carbo load, which is suggested for a marathon, or a day to day and a half for a half marathon, but increasing your carbohydrate load before going into that long run. So it's something I'm going to be practicing for Indy, or my fall marathon with the fueling being an issue in the past with the spring energy gels. I really want to not only practice like a really solid carbo load before some of my long runs this fall, but I also want to implement, the gels and what I'm going to be taking, and really try and feel as much as I can feel on how I'm going to feel on race day during peak week. It's going to be a little bit different because the fatigue level is going to be high. So it's not going to be quite there. But if you feel good during peak week, theoretically, you should feel like a beast on race day. But carbo loading is going to be a great way to set yourself up for success for that long run. Because what I know to be true is that if that long run can go well, it's your longest long run, you might have the most marathon pacing in that long run. Chances are the confidence soars. You're going into taper and you are absolutely ready to go. And if that run doesn't go well, there's probably going to be hesitation. There's going to be questions. You're going to be unsure if you're going to actually be able to do this. And that's not a fun place to be, especially when you're heading into taper. Like, taper is the time to rest, recover, rejuvenate, and also remind yourself of all the hard work that you've done and all of the runs that went well and why they went well, or the runs that didn't necessarily go as well, but how you powered through them. And if that last long run is there, it's a great place to be, and it just feels better. So the carbo load can look like anything, like a day to 2 days before. If you want to go the full 3 days, more power to you. It can be anywhere from 3 to 5 grams of carbohydrates per body pound. And you can also take a look at the macro levels. How many, if you're getting 50 to 60% of your diet in carbohydrates, you get to kind of reduce the fat down to be able to take in more carbohydrates. You want to keep your protein intake the same. That is something I've messed up in, like, I think it was 2 cycles ago, like not getting in enough protein. And I definitely notice it can also wane your energy levels. Like, you just don't have quite the same energy. So you want to make sure you're getting enough protein as well. Simple carbohydrates, reduce your fat, and have so much fun fueling your body. And it's not really just fueling your body going into the long run, but really like the entire week gets to be a focus on doing more. So key essential number 4 is trying out your race kit, your race shoes, your race gels, your race hydration during that peak week long run. So that's right. You want to simulate as much as you can. So if you are listening to music, if you're going to be doing something, if you're holding a handheld during the race, you want all of that on this run because you need to know what works and what doesn't work. The very last thing you need on race day is for something that you could have tried in training, but just didn't for various reasons, show up to be a detriment to your race on race day. I've shared that story about the Boston Marathon where I went into the 2021 Boston Marathon with brand new Alpha Flies and how confident I was going into that race because I had that shoe before. I loved that shoe. It was the very first version of the Alpha Fly, but it was a brand new shoe. And something that does happen with me, my foot, and Nikes. I have a very high arch. And in the Alpha Flies, once my foot starts to swell, there is a tendon that starts to press against like the inner lace loop on the shoe, which is usually like leather or some sort of like harder fabric, and that it doesn't feel good. And the longer I run, the worse it gets. And that started to happen at mile 10 of the Boston Marathon in 2021. And I knew what was going on because it had happened in training with a pair of their like Nike Tempo shoes. I don't think they sell that shoe anymore, but it was kind of like the training shoe of the Alpha Fly. So it was kind of cool. And it happened with that shoe. So I had to like pull over on the side of the Boston Marathon, which you can't really pull over because they have these guardrails set up against the lane or against the roads, the left and right side. And it's supposed to guard, the spectators to stay on their side, for the runners to be inside those gates. And I think it's also a safety concern, right? So people stay where they need to stay and no one's getting on the course. So that meant I didn't really have room to pull over, but I did it anyways. And I just thought to myself, you have to relace your shoes and you have to relace them quickly because people are running behind you. And the last thing I wanted was someone tripping over me because that would ruin their race more than it would ruin mine. So I ended up having to relace my shoe right before mile 20. I'd gotten through it like halfway through the hills and it just started to hurt so bad that I had to stop. And it ended up relieving some of the stress. So I was able to finish the race. But it was something looking back on, I should have bought the shoes before. I should have tested them out in like my long run, my longest long run, or a really long marathon tempo to make sure that the shoe worked for me. I know a lot of people who will get blisters from like during their race. Maybe it starts around mile 15. And if you wore that shoe in your longest long run, let's say you're doing 16, 18, 20, 22, whatever that looks like, everyone's going to be different in that space. You would have, like the runner would have known that the blister was going to happen, right? Unless it was a sock issue. But you want to simulate as much as you can to know like my shorts work, my gels work, the music works, my handheld works, everything is working. Chafing is not fun. We don't like it. We don't want it. And I think making sure not only your race kit fits and it works for you, but I was also talking to some girls last week at practice about how they're running Chicago, like Chicago could be warm or it could be on the cooler side, and just making sure they had like a backup option, making sure that they had two kind of race kits that they're testing out to depending on what the weather is going to be like, because you just don't know. And it's something that you want to be prepared for. So testing out every single thing. And maybe it's even when you wake up and how much time you have before the race and really simulating that. I definitely help athletes with that when they're running Berlin, Boston, London. When you have a huge gap in time between when you wake up and when you start your race, a lot of the majors are like that. Thankfully, Chicago isn't too bad. You want to be able to practice that to make sure that you can do it, because it does kind of throw you off when you're starting your race at maybe it's 10:30 or 11 o'clock local time, which could be either your local time or maybe a few hours ahead, but it still just kind of throws you off because it's not maybe first thing in the morning like you're used to. It's also a good chance to try your pre-race breakfast, making sure that sits well, it has time to digest, and you're good to go. And the last key essential that you definitely want to have during peak week is elevate as much as you can. And that means in every single area. So you want to eat more, you want to add in more mobility if you can, you want to hydrate more, you want to take in more electrolytes, you want to recover as hard as you can. You want to meal prep or maybe have groceries delivered or figure out a system that works for you. And I think it's also true to take time to mentally recharge, because peak week is a very demanding week, both physically and mentally. And being able to either take time away to meditate, watch a show, listen to a podcast, do something that helps you kind of take off that mental pressure is really going to help you get through the week feeling tired, but that you're able to go into taper knowing that you did the job and you got the job done and you're feeling fatigued but good. And it's a fine balancing act between the two and making sure that you don't lopside one way or the other. And every single cycle is going to be different, just like the taper, which is wild. And it's one of the things that, I don't know, like when I can dial in a peak week and a taper for someone, like I just want to continue to do that, but knowing that every cycle is going to be different because we just show up differently. Our stress levels are different, our recovery is different, our training is different, our fatigue is different. All of it is going to be different, and that is, I think, the power. One of the superpowers of having a coach or having access to someone who can help you with that. So these are your peak week essentials where you're heading into your fall race this season. I want you to think about all 5 of these things and how you can show up. And if this seems overwhelming, just even this list of 5, I would say if you have to focus in on 2 things, I would say sleep, focus in on sleep and building in as much recovery as you can, and testing out every single thing for race day and simulating like a practice race day, because those are going to be huge pieces to your success come race day in a few weeks. So for those who are running September races, oh my gosh, you're almost in peak week, which is really exciting. Chicago gets to be in peak week around mid to late September. And it's just going to be, this fall is going to be so much fun to watch everyone, show up and see what they can do and learn lessons and create wins and do all these really great things that running provides. So I hope that you gained something from this episode, and it's something that you can apply to your next peak week. Thank you so much for listening this week, and I hope you have an awesome week of running and lifing. See you next week.